Joining us now, Wally Zeins, former New York PD detective, and Cheryl Chumley, who is a staff writer for the Washington Times and author of the new book, Police State USA. Wally, to you, and Cheryl, to you, we thank you for both joining us today on America's Forum.
Thanks, JD. It's great to be here.
Well, law enforcement in the state I represented in the Congress, Arizona, local law enforcement agencies, a pretty impressive arsenal of equipment. Take a look at the inventory here by different law enforcement units in Arizona. 32 bomb suits, 704 units of night vision equipment, 1,000 guns, really 1,034, 42 forced entry tools, 64 armored vehicles, and 17 helicopters. Now, Cheryl, I take a look at Arizona. I know you wrote the book Police State USA, but we take a look at what is transpiring in the failure of the feds to protect the southern border. Can't Arizona be justified in this equipment for local law enforcement because of the border problems?
If states were using this military-grade equipment that comes right off the battlefields of Afghanistan and Iraq and so forth to protect our borders, I would probably be on board with that, because that's definitely a national security issue that could be tied to counterterrorism issues. But what's happening, not just in your state, but in states around the nation, is police departments at the local level are using this military-grade equipment, including MRAPs, which is mine-resistant, ambush-protected armored vehicles, and Kevlar's full-body gear, and so forth. They're using it to serve warrants on drug suspects, oftentimes leaving innocent Americans, like the 19-month-old toddler baby in Georgia who was just released from the hospital, often leaving innocent Americans killed and injured.
Well, Wally, I want to get you to jump in and get your take on this. And Cheryl, we'll talk about that 19-month-old real quick here in a little bit more detail. This is involved in these no-knock raids, and there seems to be an increasing number of these. And Wally, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. These SWAT raids, and they often end with innocent bystanders, or sometimes end in innocent bystanders dead or in a coma. There was a case in Wisconsin where a SWAT team was carrying out one of these no-knock raids for a search for someone who wasn't even there at the home, and that was the 19-month-old. They flew a flash bomb grenade into the room, which landed in the baby's crib. The grenade exploded, blew a hole in the baby's face and chest so deep that his ribs were exposed, and you see a picture of the result of that with that crib. You know, we understand, Wally, that there are some accidents that occur in the course of a police investigation or the apprehension of a suspect. But is this having the opposite effect of what police are hoping? Because this has to be hurting people. There was also the case in Atlanta where a 92-year-old woman was shot and killed, and those two police officers pled guilty to manslaughter.
There's no question about it that was a very tragic incident, but you have to understand something. There is a war on drugs out there, and you know, the dinosaurs would be here today if they were able to deal with change. Law enforcement has to deal with change. It's not just drugs. It's the professional criminal, it's the terrorist, it's the emotionally disturbed person. And you know, you have to understand these situations change all the time. And to get a no-knock search warrant, you have to have the district attorney on board, you have to have a judge on board. You just don't randomly pick out a house and say, we're gonna hit this place at 3 o'clock in the morning. You also have to understand that there is an element of surprise, and safety is paramount. That's the most important thing. There is a totally different uniform for inner perimeter cops that respond to the initial search warrant versus the patrol cops that are on the outside.
And Wally, you mentioned the steps that are needed to get one of these no-knock warrants, and I'm glad you did that. But again, how does that happen, considering to get these warrants? We're talking about this 19-month-old. There was also the case of a 26-year-old Iraq war veteran who was involved in one of these things, not involved in any kind of drug activity at all. You know, if it goes through the proper channels, through a district attorney and a judge, how does it still wind up happening?
Well, you know, one of the most important things is your intelligence gathering. And again, I can only speak for my department. I spent 30 years in NYPD. I was the supervisor of the hostage team and the commanding officer. And there's a lot of planning that goes into this. There's a lot of intelligence work that goes. It just don't get a search warrant. That's one aspect of it. What is important is to know, what do you know from, say, your informant? What do you know from the community about this individual? What do you know about who might be in the house? Have you done intelligence gathering? And that's the important fact. There are times when things do happen like that, and it's very tragic. But it's not something that happens 90% of the time. You know, there is a superiority of manpower. You have to have that element of surprise. You want to go home safe. And there are procedures that are intact, that are followed. Basically, it's called a dynamic entry, and it's practiced over and over and over again. And sometimes there are variables and elements that are in the house that were overlooked or did not know that they were there.
Cheryl, let's go to you now. Wally makes a case, and I think about his service to the NYPD, and I think about the NYPD in the wake of 9/11, and the fact that it basically had to up-arm in terms of dealing with terror threats and a variety of other things. But I'm interested in your response to what Wally has to say about the element of surprise, about the element of being able to go in and perform this with the necessary safeguards.
Well, first and foremost, I would argue that a police officer who serves the civilian American public, a police officer's first duty and priority is not safety of the police officer. It's to serve and protect the American citizen. Whether or not you take an oath, I'm not sure what the police officer's oath is, but I suspect you don't take an oath to protect the police officer. And second off, I would say that the war on drugs does not extend to 19-month-old toddler babies. It does not extend to 7-year-old girls in Detroit who were shot and killed. It does not extend to the 7 killed in the ACLU report that they profile, or the dozens upon dozens of others that the ACLU profiles as injured. And, you know, this is something, it's not an oops. When something happens that kills an American innocent because of a civilian police officer's actions, whether that police officer was doing those actions to preserve and protect the officer's duty or not, it demands immediate action. And my big problem is when these types of things happen, there's very little recourse that bites back at the police officer. It's pretty much, job as normal for them. Well, meanwhile, the innocent person who is sucked up in these SWAT team type tactics needlessly in most instances, are left to deal with, injuries, maiming, and sometimes grieving over dead and killed.
Another issue where, Wally, I'd like you to weigh in first. John Walsh, who we remember from so many different programs, specifically America's Most Wanted. Yes, indeed, Wally, has a new show coming on CNN. It's going to be called The Hunt. And John Walsh is saying he plans to take on the NRA, the National Rifle Association. He says we have some serious problems with guns in this country. Says the NRA's solution to arm school teachers with guns is, quote, ludicrous. Wally, what's your take on what John Walsh has to say about arming teachers and the National Rifle Association?
It's totally ludicrous. I agree with him on that. Teachers should not be armed with guns. What you have to understand, and especially with school incidents that take place, you have different groups that respond in the first responders. You have the police that are responding, you have the fire department that's responding, you have the ambulances that are responding. Every one of them has a first responders plan. The important thing is to work together with those plans so they all become one. You have to know when the police respond, it's important to work with the school to know, do the windows go up, do the windows go down, do the windows go in or out in case you have to make a dynamic entry? Does the PA system go to one room? If you have all these things in a comprehensive plan that everyone knows about, it works like clockwork. Teachers should not be there with guns. A bullet travels 1,200 on average, 1,200 feet a second. I mean, it's ludicrous, and I totally agree with him.
Okay, about a minute's left, Wally. Let's let Cheryl get in on this. Do you share the assessment of John Walsh? What do you think, Cheryl?
Well, I 100% agree that teachers should be armed. As Wally just pointed out, bullets travel 12,000 feet per second, and that's plenty of time for an attacker's bullets to strike plenty of targets. In the few minutes it takes the police to arrive on scene, set up a perimeter, and perform their duties.
Cheryl Chumley, a staff writer of the Washington Times, author of the new book Police State USA, and Wally Zeins, the former NYPD detective. We thank you both for the perspective you bring and for our discussion today. We look forward to visiting with you both on issues of importance in the not too distant future. Come back and see us again real soon. Thank you both.
Interesting to see here how you see a group like the ACLU teaming up with civil libertarians concerned about these issues here, an evolving aspect of our political culture in this country.
It's always interesting to view, and we'll have more after this.